There are significant new developments in the mysterious death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells that we want to talk about tonight. Now, Wells disappeared after boating with friends on July 4th weekend. Days later, his body was found in the water near Horn Island off Mississippi's Gulf Coast. And while investigators have said that drowning appears to be the preliminary cause of death, even though the official findings from the autopsy haven't been released, his family has continued to raise questions, right? Why did he go off on his own? Why didn't he have a cell phone? How could no one help? How could no one notice? Well, today, the Jackson County District Attorney met face-to-face with Nolan's parents and their legal team for the first time. And after that meeting, the family announced that once investigators complete their work, this case is going to be presented to a grand jury. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean charges are coming, but it does seem to suggest that jurors are going to review the evidence to determine whether any criminal charges should be filed. The family says the DA also made clear that no decisions about possible charges are going to be made until the sheriff's investigation is complete. And there's also another major development, and this involves one of the most important pieces of evidence in this case, Nolan's cell phone. The phone was reportedly with Nolan's friends. The family says that they believe content may have been removed from the device before it was returned. Now the phone is going to apparently undergo a joint forensic examination with both law enforcement and the family's independent experts reviewing the device together. They hope it can provide critical answers about Nolan's final hours.
A boat pulls away from the shore. The sun is still high. The water is calm. It's the 4th of July, the kind of afternoon that feels like it was designed for exactly this. Friends, freedom. A remote island 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast with nobody around to bother you. But count the heads on that boat as it pulls away. Count them carefully. Because there are 3. And there should be 4. Somewhere behind that boat, on an island with no cell towers, no witnesses, no cameras, an 18-year-old young man who had never once broken a promise to the people he loved is now completely alone. He was there minutes ago. He was laughing. He was alive. And then, somewhere in the stretch of time between the last moment anyone will claim to have seen him and the moment that boat decided it had waited long enough, something happened. Nobody flagged the boat down. Nobody screamed from the dock. Nobody dialed for help the second that vessel touched land with one fewer passenger than it left with. The boat just kept moving, back to the dock, into a bayou, back to the dock again, and then overland, further and further from the island, further and further from the boy still on it. Hours bled into the night before anyone thought to make a single phone call. And by the time search crews finally reached Horn Island 2 days later, there was nothing left to do but confirm what a grieving family had already felt in their bones. Nolan Xavier Wells was gone. Not missing. Not unaccounted for. Gone. And the questions that surround how that happened, the contradictions, the silences, the deleted messages, the timeline that refuses to add up no matter how many times you run it, those questions are not going away. Not on our watch. Tonight, on Unsolved Files, we are pulling back every layer of this case. The federal agents. The threatened judge. The young woman who finally broke her silence. The 2 autopsies with no results. The phone that came back empty. We are going to walk through all of it, what is confirmed, what is contested, and what remains disturbingly, maddeningly unanswered. But before we go any further, we need to say this clearly. This case involves the loss of a young person under circumstances that are deeply troubling. Some of what we cover tonight is heavy. It is raw. And it should be. Take care of yourself as you watch and step away if you need to. There is no shame in that. If you are new to Unsolved Files, welcome. We do not chase clicks here. We chase the truth and we stay with the case until we get it. Drop a comment below and tell us what city or country you are watching from tonight. And if you have been riding with this channel for a while, sharing our videos, leaving your thoughts, hitting that subscribe button, you already know what this community stands for. Cases like Nolan's do not disappear from this channel just because the news cycle moves on. Now, let's talk about what really happened on that island. Before we get into what happened on that island, you need to know who Nolan Xavier Wells actually was. Not the headlines. Not the social media posts. The documented record of a young man whose entire life pointed in one direction, and whose death made no sense to anyone who knew him. Nolan grew up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a tight coastal community just east of Biloxi where everybody tends to know everybody, especially if their kid plays football. And Nolan played football. He spent 4 years as a wide receiver at Ocean Springs High School, earned 2 all-region honors, and over his junior and senior seasons alone caught 63 passes for 724 yards and 10 touchdowns. Those are not participation numbers. That is a player who showed up consistently and delivered. His head coach at Ocean Springs, Jake Bramlett, spoke publicly about Nolan after his death. Bramlett described him as someone who led through action rather than words, treated people around him with consistent respect, and never needed the spotlight to influence the people beside him. Former teammate Sherrod Whitehead echoed that directly, calling Nolan one of the most respectful people he had ever known. These are not grieving tributes inflating someone's reputation. They are consistent with everything else on the record about how Nolan carried himself. On National Signing Day in February 2025, Nolan signed with Southwest Mississippi Community College to continue playing football at the next level. He sat down with local outlet WLOX that day and said something that stuck. He told them it was truly a blessing to be there with some of his best friends and teammates, and that most of them were going to college together. He was not performing for the camera. He was describing the kind of life he had built, one built around loyalty to the people in his corner. At Southwest Mississippi, he enrolled in general business and was preparing for his sophomore season. Preseason camp was scheduled to begin the Monday after the 4th of July weekend. He had been training hard all summer. His father Elmore Wansley told media that Nolan had started to understand that football at the college level was not just about having fun anymore. It was becoming a business, and Nolan was treating it like one. Elmore also talked about a rule he had drilled into all of his children since they were young. If you go out with a group, you come back with that group. He told Nolan that every single time his son headed out with friends, his exact words were, "Go with 5, come back with 5, because safety is in numbers." Every time Nolan said, "Yes, sir." Every time. His mother Christine Wansley described a moment that captured her son more clearly than any statistics could. A teacher once emailed her to share that during a class exercise, a student with special needs had answered a question correctly. Before the teacher could react, Nolan quietly signaled the rest of the class to put their hands down and let that student have the moment. Then he started celebrating. The whole room followed him. The teacher said the classroom went wild. That was not performance. That was character. Nolan's actual close circle included 2 brothers he had grown up with since childhood, Jalen and Javon Williams, sons of a family friend named Tashima. These were the friendships Christine could verify personally because she knew their mother and their family well. That detail about Tashima and her sons becomes relevant later in this story, in ways nobody anticipated on the morning of July 4th. That is who got on that boat. To understand what happened on July 4th, you first need to understand where it happened and what that location actually means from an investigative standpoint. Horn Island sits approximately 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, directly south of Ocean Springs. It is a barrier island, roughly 12 miles long, narrow, and almost entirely undeveloped. It falls under federal protection as part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, administered by the National Park Service. There are no stores on Horn Island, no restrooms, no facilities of any kind, no cell towers. Once you are on that island, you are there until a boat takes you off. That federal designation is not just a geographical detail. It has direct legal consequences for this case. Any incident occurring on federally protected land automatically brings federal agencies into the picture. The National Park Service, the Coast Guard, and potentially the FBI, not because investigators suspected anything unusual from the start, but because of where the incident occurred. The jurisdiction follows the land. For people who live along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, a boat trip to Horn Island on a holiday weekend is completely ordinary. It draws crowds every summer, and the 4th of July brings some of the largest gatherings of the year. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources monitors vessel traffic in these waters and maintains GPS tracking on registered boats operating in the area. That monitoring system becomes one of the most important sources of documented evidence in this case. On July 4, 2026, the island was packed. Traces Tin Shepard, who was part of the group that traveled there with Nolan that day, later told ABC News that approximately 300 people were gathered near their group on the island. Many of them were former high school classmates. Multiple boats had come out, all carrying friends, as part of what had been organized as a final send-off before everyone returned to school or work after the holiday break. Shepard also confirmed the group had been drinking alcohol since late morning after arriving on the island. That detail is part of the confirmed record and factors into the conditions surrounding everything that followed. The boat carrying Nolan and his friends departed from a private dock on El Camino Real Road in Ocean Springs. That is where the documented timeline begins. And that timeline is where this case gets complicated. What separates this case from pure speculation is that a significant portion of July 4th is not a matter of anyone's memory or account. It is documented. GPS tracking data obtained by CBS News from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources logged the movements of that boat from the moment it left the dock to the moment it was pulled out of the water. That data does not have an agenda. It does not contradict itself. It simply shows where the boat was and when. Here is what it shows. At 9:56 in the morning, the boat departs from a private dock on El Camino Real Road in Ocean Springs. 4 teenagers on board. The ride out takes just over an hour. At 11:14 a.m. the vessel arrives at Horn Island. From that point forward, the group spends the better part of the day on the island among an estimated 300 people, many of them former classmates, spread across the beach in what had been organized as a last celebration before everyone returned to school or work. At approximately 3 p.m. Nolan Wells is seen for the last time. He is wearing blue swim trunks and sunglasses. That is the final confirmed sighting. Everything after that point is either disputed, unverified, or simply unknown. Then comes 4 p.m. NBC News obtained audio from a records request of a call placed to a private towing company that afternoon. On that recording, a voice says the bilge pump has stopped working, the boat is going down, and requests a tow from the west tip of Horn Island. The dispatcher responds and asks whether everyone on board is accounted for and in good health. The caller confirms they are. That exchange is on tape. The mechanical failure was real. The boat was genuinely taking on water. At 4:31 p.m. the GPS record shows the boat departs Horn Island. Nolan Wells is not on it. 3 teenagers where there were 4. From that point the data tracks every movement. The boat returns to its original departure dock. At 5:52 p.m. it moves into Fort Bayou. At 6:06 p.m. it comes back to the dock a second time. At 7:19 p.m. it travels to the Fort Bayou boat launch. After that it is removed from the water entirely, loaded onto a trailer, and transported overland to the Biloxi residence of the boat's owners. That is a 2-hour and 48-minute journey across multiple stops after leaving an island where a member of the group had been left behind. At no point during any of those stops did anyone contact emergency services. The first call for help came at approximately 11 p.m. that night. Not from the teenagers who had been with Nolan all day. A friend made that call to the Coast Guard. Here is what that means in real terms. Between the moment the boat left Horn Island at 4:31 p.m. and the moment anyone contacted the Coast Guard at 11 p.m., 6.5 hours passed. 6.5 hours during which Nolan Wells was alone on a remote federal island with no cell service, no facilities, and no way off. But the timeline does not stop there. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office did not formally request multi-agency Coast Guard assistance until approximately noon on July 5th. That is 13 hours after the first call was made. No public explanation for that gap has ever been provided by the Sheriff's Office. What was Christine Wansley doing during all of this? She was waiting. She received a call that night from Warren Hudson, one of the teenagers who had been on the boat with her son. That call was how she learned Nolan had not come back with the group. She reported him missing to authorities around midnight. Not one of the teenagers on that boat had called her. Warren Hudson made contact after the fact. The mother of the missing boy found out from a phone call, hours after her son had last been seen, on a federal island 10 miles from shore with no way home. That is the confirmed timeline. Every timestamp above is documented. Nothing in this scene is in dispute. The GPS data tells you where the boat went. What it cannot tell you is why Nolan was not on it. For that, investigators and the public have had to rely on witness accounts. And that is exactly where this case gets complicated, because the 2 most important accounts of Nolan's final hours on that island do not match. The first account comes from Traciston Shepard. Shepard was on the island that day and gave his version of events in an interview with ABC News and later on Good Morning America. According to Shepard, when the boat needed to leave due to the bilge pump failure, Nolan chose to stay behind. Shepard said Nolan had spent part of the afternoon with a girl he had met on the island, and that Nolan told the group he would return to the mainland later on another friend's boat. In Shepard's telling, there was no conflict, no pressure, and no reason for concern. Nolan made a decision and the group respected it. The second account comes from the girl Nolan had been spending time with, identified publicly only as Katie. Katie did not give her account through a press release or a social media post. She sat down face to face with Christine Wansley directly, with no intermediaries between them, and told her what Nolan had actually said before they parted ways on that beach. According to Christine, Katie told her that Nolan said he was going back to rejoin the boys on their boat. Not staying. Not waiting for a different ride. Going back to his group. Attorney Ben Crump addressed this conflict directly at a press conference. His summary of the contradiction was straightforward. The boys said Nolan chose to stay for the girl. The girl said Nolan told her he was going back to the boys. Both statements cannot reflect what actually happened. One of them does not align with the truth, and the investigation needs to determine which one. Then there is the video. A clip began circulating on social media that appeared to show a confrontation on the island. In the audio, a voice can be heard demanding a phone back with clear agitation. Ben Crump stated at a press conference that multiple people had identified that voice as Nolan's, and that the clip raised serious questions about what had occurred before the boat departed. The clip spread rapidly and shaped public perception of the case for days. Traces Tin Shepard then came forward and told ABC News and Rolling Stone that the voice in that clip was his own, not Nolan's. He explained that the argument captured in the video was between him and a stranger who had started a physical confrontation with him. He said his friends were physically restraining him when he can be heard yelling. Nolan, according to Shepard, was not involved in that exchange at all. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office confirmed they were aware of the clip. They made a public request for anyone with original unedited photos or videos from Horn Island on July 4th, specifically those showing alleged altercations or images believed to include Nolan Wells, to contact investigators. They did not confirm whether any altercation on the island involved Nolan directly. One more detail matters here. When Shepard described himself publicly as Nolan's best friend and childhood friend, Christine Wansley responded in an interview with the Griot. She said she and Elmore had never met Traces Tin Shepard. He had never been to their home. She acknowledged Nolan and Shepard may have known each other from high school, but she was clear that childhood friend was not how she would describe that relationship. The friends she could speak to personally were Jalen and Javon Williams, whose mother Tashima she knew well, whose family had been part of their lives for years. 2 accounts, 1 island, and a gap between them that the investigation has not yet closed. When Nolan's body was recovered off the northwestern tip of Horn Island on the morning of July 6th, his cell phone was not with him. That single fact opened a separate line of questions that has run alongside the physical investigation ever since. Here is what is confirmed. After Warren Hudson called Christine Wansley that night to tell her Nolan had not returned with the group, Christine immediately reached out to Tashima, the family friend whose sons Jalen and Javon had grown up alongside Nolan. Christine pulled up the Life 360 family location app on her phone. Life 360 tracks a device's location in real time and logs its movement history. What the app showed her stopped her. The phone's location data placed it back on land, not on the island, while the teenagers who had been with Nolan were simultaneously telling her he had not come back with them. Christine told Tashima where the phone was showing. Tashima went to that location and physically retrieved the device. The phone had not been lost. It had not washed ashore with Nolan. It was on the mainland in a location traceable through an app, recovered by a family friend who went and picked it up. When Christine and her sister went through the phone, they opened both of Nolan's Snapchat accounts. Snapchat content, photos and videos, remains visible on the platform for up to 24 hours under standard settings. Nolan was documented by people who knew him as someone who posted when he was out having a good time. There was nothing on either account. No content from July 4th. No photos from the island. No videos. Both accounts had been cleared of any activity from that day. Christine's sister noted it independently. They both reached the same observation at the same time. Attorney Ben Crump also identified a second piece of physical evidence that did not follow a logical path. Nolan's phone and his keys were returned to others after the trip. They were not found with his body. They were not recovered from the island by search crews. They came back through the group that had been on the boat, and that fact, Crump argued, was one of the documented contradictions requiring direct explanation. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office formally requested the cell phone from the Wansley family as part of the active investigation. Crump confirmed the family intended to turn it over, but announced that the review would not be one-sided. His team arranged a coordinated joint inspection in which the family's independent investigators and law enforcement would examine the device together, side by side. That process was ongoing as of this recording. On the public tip front, Crump's independent investigation team confirmed they were receiving between 50 and 100 contacts per day from people who were on Horn Island on July 4th or who knew someone who was. Many of those people may have unknowingly captured footage relevant to the case on their personal devices. The sheriff's office tip line remained active. Investigators were still asking for original unedited photos and videos from Horn Island on July 4th, particularly anything showing alleged altercations or images believed to include Nolan Wells. The phone existed. The data existed. Some of it came back. Some of it did not. While the phone was being tracked on land and the questions were beginning to stack up, a search operation was being assembled to find Nolan Wells on the water. The first call to the Coast Guard came from a friend at approximately 11 p.m. on July 4th. As established in the timeline, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office did not formally activate a multi-agency search until approximately noon on July 5th. Once that request was made, multiple agencies moved in. The U.S. Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and the National Park Service all joined the effort. Volunteers from the United Cajun Navy, a civilian search and rescue organization with significant experience conducting operations along the Gulf Coast, also participated. The search covered the waters around Horn Island across 2 days. On the morning of July 6th, at approximately 8:45 a.m., a National Park Service ranger located a body in the water off the northwestern tip of Horn Island. The description matched Nolan Wells. Because of the condition of the remains after 2 days in open water, dental records were used to formally confirm his identity. That confirmation came back positive. It was Nolan. What happened next became one of the most misunderstood moments in the entire public handling of this case. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lynn stated publicly that there were no immediately obvious signs of trauma on Nolan's body at the scene. That statement traveled fast. Many people interpreted it as the investigation closing the door on foul play before it had even properly opened. The reaction online was immediate and intense. Lynn then clarified what that statement actually meant. A field observation made at a recovery scene is not a forensic finding. It is a first look under difficult conditions in open water, after 2 days of exposure. It does not account for internal injuries, toxicology, or anything that requires laboratory analysis to detect. Because the circumstances of Nolan's death were uncertain, Lynn confirmed he requested a full autopsy from the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office specifically so that trained forensic pathologists could conduct a complete examination under proper conditions. That autopsy was performed on July 7th. Its findings, however, were not immediately available because they depend on toxicology results. Toxicology testing is standard procedure in any death classified as suspicious or unnatural. The samples are sent to outside laboratories, and turnaround times routinely run anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks depending on the complexity of the screening required. Sheriff John Ledbetter confirmed the investigation was active, ongoing, and had reached no formal conclusion about cause or manner of death. The case was far from closed. With the official investigation producing no public findings and the state autopsy results weeks away, the Wansley family made a decision. They were not going to wait. Within days of Nolan's body being recovered, Christine and Elmore Wansley retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump. Crump is one of the most recognized names in American civil rights law, having represented families in some of the highest profile cases of the last decade. Alongside him, attorney Liza Park joined the legal team as co-counsel. Together they built a parallel investigation that would run independent of the Jackson County Sheriff's Office from the ground up. The first major move was the independent autopsy. Crump's team made a deliberate choice to send Nolan's body out of Mississippi entirely. The family wanted a forensic examination conducted by a pathologist with zero professional ties to Mississippi law enforcement. Nolan's remains were transported to Washington, D.C., where that independent examination was carried out. The cost of the autopsy was covered by Colin Kaepernick through his Know Your Rights Camp Autopsy Initiative, an organization Kaepernick established specifically to help families obtain independent forensic examinations in cases where they have concerns about official findings. It was not the first time the initiative had stepped in for a family in Mississippi. Actor and filmmaker Tyler Perry separately reached out to cover all funeral expenses for the Wansley family. Perry released a statement saying his decision was personal. He said he understood what it meant to need answers that take too long to arrive. On the financial front, a GoFundMe organized to support the Wansley family surpassed $230,000 within approximately 2 weeks of Nolan's death. The response reflected how quickly this case had moved beyond Mississippi's borders into national attention. On July 15, Christine and Elmore Wansley sat down with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath in Pascagoula. It was the first direct meeting between the family and the prosecutor since Nolan's death. Crump described the meeting as respectful and said both sides were candid. Following that meeting, McElrath confirmed to the family that once the sheriff's investigation is complete, the full findings will be presented to a grand jury. That jury will then determine whether criminal wrongdoing occurred and whether formal charges are warranted. It is worth being precise about what a grand jury referral means. It is not a trial. It is not a finding of guilt. In Jackson County, it is described by local legal sources as standard procedure for any death classified as unnatural or suspicious. The referral alone does not indicate that investigators have concluded foul play occurred. Former Judge Carlos Moore has been publicly skeptical about whether this commitment represents meaningful progress. He cited concerns about this specific prosecutor's office based on an unrelated prior matter. That perspective is part of the documented public record and deserves to be noted. Now here is where this case stands as of the recording of this video, and this is a development that most coverage of this case has not yet caught up to. Ben Crump has confirmed he will announce the preliminary findings of the independent autopsy at the 117th NAACP National Convention in Chicago on Wednesday, July 22 at 8 a.m. Central Daylight Time at McCormick Place West. Christine and Elmore Wansley will be present. NAACP President and CEO Derek Johnson will stand alongside them. Those results have not been publicly released yet. Tomorrow morning that changes. If you are not subscribed to Unsolved Files right now, do it before you leave this video. Turn on notifications. The moment those autopsy findings are announced, this channel will have the breakdown ready. This is the development this entire case has been waiting for, and you do not want to find out about it from someone else's thumbnail 3 days later. As the independent legal strategy took shape, a separate dimension of this case was developing that most people following the story had not fully understood. Federal agents were involved. And the reason why matters. The FBI's Jackson Field office released a formal on-the-record statement about their role. That statement confirmed the following. The FBI has assisted the Jackson County Sheriff's Office using federal tools and partnerships in certain aspects of the investigation. The Sheriff's Office is the lead investigative agency and will remain so. Sheriff John Ledbetter separately confirmed that the FBI has been assisting specifically with digital evidence review, and noted that federal involvement in an incident on Horn Island is not unusual to begin with, given that the island falls under National Park Service jurisdiction and is federally protected land. But the FBI statement specified something that cut through the noise around their involvement. The federal focus in this case is on interstate threats directed at individuals connected to the case. That is the element that extended federal jurisdiction beyond the geography of the island. Not a finding of foul play. Not a federal takeover of the investigation. Threats serious enough and far-reaching enough to cross state lines. Those threats were real and they touched people at every level of this story. Jackson County Chancery Judge Ashley Cole confirmed publicly that her family had received death threats since the case became national news. Judge Cole is the stepmother of Warren Hudson, one of the teenagers who was on the boat with Nolan on July 4th. When online speculation began circulating images of her minor children, Cole initially deactivated her social media accounts, stating she feared for the safety of herself and her family. She later published a statement on Facebook to address what she described as rumors. In that statement she confirmed Warren had cooperated fully with law enforcement, that he last saw Nolan at approximately 3 p.m., and that the boat departed around 4:30 p.m. after the bilge pump failed and the vessel began taking on water. She was direct about one other thing. She and her family were willing to communicate directly with Ben Crump and the Wansley family and to share everything they knew so the family could get answers and properly grieve their son. Tracis Tin Shepard separately confirmed during his Good Morning America appearance that he had also received threats following his public statements about the case. Here is why all of this matters beyond the individuals involved. Every credible threat sent to a witness, a family member, or anyone connected to this investigation makes it less likely that people holding relevant information feel safe enough to come forward. Intimidation does not help find the truth. It actively works against it. And in a case already defined by gaps in information, anything that widens those gaps causes direct damage to the investigation itself. The FBI's presence is not a sign that federal authorities have determined what happened to Nolan Wells. It is a sign that the threats surrounding this case became serious enough to require a federal response. There is a layer to this case that cannot be accurately reported without addressing it directly, and it would be irresponsible to leave it out. Nolan Xavier Wells was the only black teenager in the group on that boat. His death occurred in Mississippi. And those two facts, sitting alongside an unexplained 13-hour search delay and a field statement about no visible trauma that was widely misread as a conclusion, produced a national response that arrived fast and has not slowed down. Ben Crump has been explicit in his public statements about why the family is not willing to simply accept official accounts without independent verification. He has invoked Mississippi's documented history directly when speaking about this case, not as an accusation against any specific individual, but as the documented context within which this family is operating and within which they are being asked to trust a process. The NAACP responded institutionally. The organization formally adopted a resolution urging local, state, and federal authorities, including the United States Department of Justice, to conduct a full, in-depth, and transparent investigation into Nolan's death. NAACP President and CEO Derek Johnson has been publicly engaged with the case and will stand alongside Ben Crump and the Wansley family when the independent autopsy findings are announced in Chicago. Reverend Al Sharpton, through the National Action Network, officiated Nolan's funeral and has remained publicly involved in calling for answers. During the funeral service itself, Sharpton made a statement that deserves to be recorded accurately. He said the case should not be prejudged in either direction. He said clearly that no one could say with certainty that race was a factor, but equally that no one could say with certainty that it was not. His position was that the evidence needed to come in before conclusions were drawn. Since the funeral, Sharpton has announced a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction in Nolan's death. What can be stated as confirmed fact is this. The racial dimension of this case is part of the documented public record. It has shaped the national response. And it is part of why this case is still being watched by people far beyond Mississippi. On Monday, July 20, 2026, Ocean Springs stopped. Nolan Xavier Wells was laid to rest at Centerpoint Church, the service beginning at 11 a.m. following a 2-hour visitation. Reverend Al Sharpton officiated. Tyler Perry covered every funeral expense for the Wansley family, asking nothing in return. The celebration of life that followed was held at the Jackson County Fairgrounds, because Christine Wansley knew her son. She said he would not have wanted people sitting in a room crying. He would have wanted people together. At the service, Christine addressed Nolan directly. She told him the family would always be proud of the legacy of love, kindness, and faith he left behind. Elmore Wansley stood beside her. There was a moment before the service that reflected something about how this community responded. The Mississippi Coast Coliseum and Convention Center had offered its venue for the funeral. The board voted to approve it. The family chose Centerpoint Church instead, and the Coliseum's executive director Sam Voisin released a statement extending full condolences and support to the Wansley family regardless of their decision. An institution that never knew Nolan personally showed up for his family without condition. Jake Bramlett, his high school coach, was among those publicly mourning. Sherrod Whitehead, his former teammate, had already spoken. Jalen and Javon Williams, the childhood friends Christine had named as his true inner circle, were part of a community that buried one of its own while still waiting for answers about how he died. The investigation was not paused for the funeral. Here is where every active element of this case stands as of July 21, 2026. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office conducted Nolan's autopsy on July 7. Those results, including toxicology findings, have not been publicly released. Toxicology processing through outside laboratories is ongoing. The independent autopsy commissioned by the Wansley family and conducted in Washington, D.C. is complete. Ben Crump will announce the preliminary findings tomorrow morning, July 22, at the 117th NAACP National Convention in Chicago alongside Christine and Elmore Wansley and NAACP President and CEO Derek Johnson. Those findings have not been made public yet. The joint review of Nolan's cell phone between the family's independent investigators and the Jackson County Sheriff's Office is ongoing. No confirmed findings from that review have been released. District Attorney Angel Myers-McElrath has committed to presenting the full investigative findings to a grand jury in Jackson County once Sheriff John Ledbetter's investigation is complete. That process has not yet begun. The FBI Jackson Field office remains active on digital evidence review and the interstate threat investigation. No federal charges have been filed. Reverend Al Sharpton has announced a $50,000 reward for information leading to an arrest and conviction in Nolan's death. The questions that have defined this case from the beginning remain open. Why did 13 hours pass between the first Coast Guard call and a formal search launch? Why was Nolan's phone not with him when his body was found? And why did its content come back empty? How did his phone and keys return to the mainland without him? What did Katie mean when she told Christine that Nolan said he was going back to the boat? And how does that square with what the teenagers on that boat reported? What will the independent autopsy preliminary findings show tomorrow? What will the toxicology results ultimately reveal? And when the grand jury convenes, what will they determine? If you were on Horn Island on July 4, 2026, and you have not yet come forward, investigators are still asking for your help. Contact the Jackson County Sheriff's Office at 228-769-3065 during regular business hours or 228-769-3063 after hours. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. His family buried him without a single official answer for how he died. That is where this case stands tonight. Unsolved Files will be here when the answers come. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The follow-up video covering tomorrow's autopsy announcement is already being built. We do not leave cases like this one until the full story is told.